Are we ready with everything done? As I ring this bowl, let's relax into this common time and space. Let's realize that we need to be together. We yearn for connection, the familiar faces of friends, and the sounds of shared voices. Very nice, thank you, Michael. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalists of the Chester River, both to all of you here with us today and those joining us on Zoom. Okay, we have, it's a growing number, thank you. Today we welcome the Reverend Ann Ledbetter to our pulpit. Ann is familiar to many of us, as she has been here before. Plus, she's the chaplain at Heron Point, where several of us live. And it's nice to have you here, Ann. Chaplain Ann has been very active in bringing the issues of race, diversity, and fairness to us at Heron Point, and we appreciate all that she does there. We have some announcements in no particular order. First, from the stewardship team. This is the last Sunday to turn in your pledge form before we start making individual reminder calls. That's almost a threat, isn't it? There are extra pledge forms on the poster in the lobby. Thank you to those of you who have already responded. Last year we had 56 pledges. This year, as of Saturday, we have 31 pledges to support next year's budget. We've reached 49% of our goal. Please consider the importance of UUCR in your life. Turn in your pledges today. The pricing for the pathway options leading out to the Memorial Garden are now posted in the hallway, and those prices cover the exposed aggregate and the embossed concrete options. Please review them in preparation for, and here's the announcement, 2 weeks from now, March the 12th, will be a congregational meeting here in the sanctuary, which will consist of votes on which of those options to pursue, and then I am assuming that then we will pursue them. Next item, the annual yard sale and auction scheduled for April 29th. We're looking pretty far out here. Needs your help of donations and volunteer positions. You will be receiving an email in the next day or two with information on possible ways you can help. Keep an eye out for it, and if you have any questions, please contact Darlene Wiggers, our office administrator. She is filling in this year as the auction coordinator. And finally, on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, we have the potluck dinner scheduled, but we need hosts for those dinners. Please see Diane Shields for more details and to volunteer. That's very important. And that concludes our announcements. And if you could help me by reading the words for the chalice lighting that are in the order of service, and I'll go ahead and light.
So we don't read this together?
We do.
We do. Okay, I'll leave it. We light this chalice as a symbol of the light within all creation. We light this chalice for truth. May the search for truth be with us always. We light this chalice for love. May the love for others be strong in our hearts.
Our first hymn is in the teal hymnal, number 1026. We might find it a little unfamiliar, but that's okay. We welcome those. And I think it fits nicely into the topic that Anne is going to us today. Not so bad at all. I have some brief opening words, sort of fitting this service, strong women of color, and it's a slightly more personal look at what we are fortunate to have, and that is the Harriet Tubman Museum. It's impossible to add anything to it, but that's not going to stop me from trying. Try to imagine, if you will, you were 20-something, and you decided that I can no longer take this situation. Her family had been sold, a lot was going on, she was afraid she was going to be sold. She decided to leave. This was in 1849, she was, like I said, 20-something. So, in the dark of night in September, she left. Try to imagine how that felt, walking out. September, it's probably not that warm anymore. There are no lights, there are no roads. There's some trails, maybe paths, but it would be too dangerous to use those anyway. So she struck off for Philadelphia. She had, I think, a little bit of connection to Underground Railway stops so that perhaps she knew where she could find a place to stop. But that's a 90-mile trip, and I don't think she'd ever been there before. Try to get a sense of how that would feel. In the cold, in the dark, terrified that somebody was going to be looking for you, so you didn't dare go on any regularly transited road. Well, suffice to say, and we all know, she made it. And, but that's not the end of the story, nor is that the biggest takeaway from the story. She went back. Over the course of 10 years, she went back at least a dozen times, bringing family members, other friends and relations out from slavery into at least Philadelphia. That was safe until the 1850 passage of the Fugitive Slave Act. And she continued, and I encourage you, if you really want to see the end of that story, visit the Harriet Tubman Museum. It is quite amazing. And she continued serving in the 10 years, after the 10 years where she was making her round trips, bringing about 70 slaves to freedom. She continued serving, and she wound up serving the Union Army as both cook and later spy. She was involved in the release of 700 captured slaves in the South, so she certainly qualifies as a woman of courage. And it makes a difference to me when I think about if it were me and I were walking out into the dark, into the cold, and didn't really know where I was going. I'm not sure how I would handle that. But that may be something for us to keep in mind as Anne shares other stories. I'd like now to move on to acknowledgments of the heart. And I will light a candle for you when you come up here to the podium to share your joy or concern. And I'll first light a candle for all those enduring the continued war in Ukraine, now entering its second year, but also for the many who are suffering the effects of gun violence in this country. So I will light the first, and as you come up to share your story, I will light candles for you.
sure whether Jane Hardy was going to be here today, and she's not. So, but I think most people are aware that she's facing some surgery on March 2nd, and so let us, keep our hearts and our thoughts with her. And I would love to see personally a response to the plea for help for her for the auction. Jane has carried this auction for a number of years and was planning to this year and can't. And so I think it would be a nice tribute to her if we all kind of stepped up and helped out with this.
Is that
Are we working?
Are we? We are. Thank you, good call. I'm talking away, what do I know? For those items shared and for all those that are held and not shared, let us take a moment of reflection and silence. Amen. So as we were preparing, Anne pointed me towards this reading, saying she thought it was appropriate and it would be nice to be read. And I agreed completely once I read it. So this is For Courage to Do Justice by Alan Patton. O Lord, open my eyes that I may see the needs of others. Open my ears that I may hear their cries. Open my heart so that they need not be without succor. Let me not be afraid to defend the weak because of the anger of the strong, nor afraid to defend the poor because of the anger of the rich. Show me where love and hope and faith are needed, and use me to bring them to those places. And so open my eyes and my ears that I may this coming day be able to do some form of work of peace for thee. Amen. Lost my place.
So is this one on?
Yes.
No, it's not. Okay. It's great to be with you today. I thought of another Harriet when you shared about Harriet Tubman. Have you heard of Harriet Shepherd? Okay. Well, that's for another time. But I learned about her from the Chesapeake Heartland Project, which came and had an exhibit at Heron Point. And she was an enslaved woman in Chestertown and had quite a remarkable escape with her children. So we are surrounded by some mighty Harriets. I come to you not as an authority or, I guess I am a preacher, but as a fellow journeyer and a fellow explorer. About a month ago, I preached on the Beatitudes at Heron Point, the first 12 verses of Matthew chapter 5, Sermon on the Mount. And the passage actually ended with verse 13, where Jesus said, You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? The metaphor Jesus used grabbed me. Yet again, you are the salt of the earth, and it's been percolating in my mind for weeks now. When we refer to someone as the salt of the earth, we generally mean that they are a fine, good, upstanding, and honest person. But I think the metaphor is much richer and nuanced with layers of meaning. In ancient times, salt was not only used for flavoring and preserving foods, but also in making sacrifices. In Scripture, you're continually told to put salt in the sacrifices, probably for preservation, but still, it was salt in the sacrifices. And fertilizing the ground in planting. Moreover, the most common reference to salt in Scripture has to do with judgment or destroying evil. There's a sense in which disciples have the same purpose. God scatters salty believers throughout the world as a way of judging evil, destroying wickedness, and preventing greed or murder or injustice from taking root. I wonder which property of salt Jesus had in mind when he told the people, "You are the salt of the earth." Probably all of them. He alludes to the importance of flavor for sure, and yet again, I think the metaphor has multiple rich meanings. When I looked up salty in the dictionary, the definition suggested first and foremost tasty, something that's tasty and preserving. But the second one resonated with me. Salty also means lively, vigorous, spirited, and maybe a good synonym would be tough. My reflecting on salty individuals merged this month with my readings in Black history. And so this morning I offered examples of 3 salty women who in the face of great challenges lived spirited and remarkable, indeed vigorously faithful lives. I'm sure we've all heard of Sojourner Truth, who was born Isabel Bonfrey. Her owners were Dutch Americans, and they only spoke Low Dutch to their slaves, thereby kind of limiting them and their circumference. In 1807, Belle was about 9 years old, and she was sold with a flock of sheep for $100. Imagine, as Jan did, imagining Harriet Tubman, imagine being a 9-year-old being sold to a man, a family, and only knowing Low Dutch, and they're commanding you to do all these things, and you don't know what the heck they're saying. Well, this led to daily beatings for her. She was sold about 18 months later to a tavern owner, and then less than 2 years later, finally she was sold to John Dumont, who she believed to be a fairly decent slave owner, and yet he abused and raped her. I think one of her children was due to John Dumont. In about 1815, Belle met and fell in love with an enslaved man named Robert from a neighboring farm. But Robert's owner, Charles Catton, was a landscape painter, and he forbade the relationship. He didn't want his slave to be procreating children that wouldn't be his, that he wouldn't own. Robert continued to sneak off to see Bell, and the owner and his son found him and beat him to a pulp, let's say. He died a few years later. Bell eventually married an older enslaved man named Thomas, she bore 5 children. Her firstborn, James, died in childhood. The second, Diana, was from John Dumont. And then she had with Thomas, Peter, Elizabeth, and Sophia. Though the state of New York began to legislate the abolition of slavery in 1799, the process of emancipating those people was not complete until July 4th, 1827. Now, Dumont had promised Belle freedom a year before the emancipation, but he reneged. Evidently, she hurt her hand and was less productive, and he decided he needed what she could give him another year. She was infuriated, continued to work, spinning, and spun 100 pounds of wool to satisfy her sense of obligation to him before she left with her daughter, her infant daughter, Sophia. She found her way to the home of Isaac and Maria Van Wagenen, Quakers, who took her and her baby in, and they offered to buy her labor, so to speak, and pay Dumont $20 for the rest of the year of her work, which he accepted. She lived there until the New York State emancipation was approved. And when she went back for her children, she learned that Peter had been sold. And then he had been resold illegally to a southern slave owner in Alabama. This is one thing I didn't know about Sojourner Truth. With the help of the Van Wagenens, she took issue with this, filed suit, and it went to the New York Supreme Court. She was the first woman of color to win in court against a white man. In 1828, after months of legal proceedings, she got her son back, but he had been abused by those enslaving him. In 1827, she became a Christian and participated in the founding of the Methodist Church in Kingston, New York. She had a very interesting spiritual journey. While she was pretty much a Christian for the rest of her life, she participated in a sect. I think she was working for the gentleman who was in charge of it in New York, left that with some disillusionment. And then she also participated in a number of kind of intentional communities that lived together, some as large as 200 people. And this was across the Midwest, actually. In 1839, Bell's son Peter took a job on a whaling trip called the Zone of Nantucket. And for the next 2 years, she received 3 letters from him, though in one of the letters, he indicated he had written more that she hadn't received, and that he had not received any of hers. When the ship returned to port in 1842, Peter was not on board. So it was speculated what might have happened to him. She gave herself the name Sojourner Truth the year after, in 1843, after becoming convinced that God had called her to leave the city and go to the countryside, testifying the hope that was in her. Have you heard of her best-known speech It was at the Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio. A variation of the speech was entitled years later, "Ain't I a Woman?" Well, the earliest record of that speech, that line is not even in it. "Ain't I a woman?" The person who recounted the speech 10 years later wrote it in the vernacular of a Southern slave. But think of this. Belle, or Sojourner Truth, English was her second language. She always spoke with a Dutch accent. So that speech really doesn't reflect her accurately, though I know it was a powerful speech. During the Civil War, Truth helped recruit black troops for the Union Army, and she was personally invited to an audience with President Lincoln, who took her hand and told her he looked forward to seeing her again. After the war, she tried unsuccessfully to secure land grants from the federal government for formerly enslaved people. She continued to travel and speak out on behalf of women and African Americans until her death in the upper 80s. That's how old she was. Sojourner Truth lived a life flavored with toughness, tenacity, faith, and justice, fighting for a more equitable society for African Americans and for women. Her issues included abolition, voting rights, and property rights. She was one of the first to address the intersecting social justice issues. In 2009, there are a number of statues of Sojourner Truth scattered all over the country. A memorial bust of her, though, in 2009 was unveiled in Emancipation Hall in the U.S. Capitol, making her the first African American woman to have a statue in the Capitol building. My next two salty saints have February birthdays. February 4th is Rosa Parks' birthday. She was born in Tuskegee, Alabama, and in the 40s and 50s served as secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP, working as a civil rights organizer and activist. On November 27th, 1955, Rosa attended a meeting at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery. The meeting's speakers addressed the Emmett Till case. Did y'all see the movie Till? I haven't yet seen it, but we know the story that in August of 1955, this black teenager, Emmett Till, from the North, was visiting relatives in Mississippi and was brutally murdered for allegedly flirting with a white woman. Well, at this meeting that night, these men addressed the Emmett Till case, including the news that Till's two murderers had just been acquitted. Parks was deeply disturbed and incensed by the verdict. And just 4 days later, she took her famous stand on that Montgomery bus ride. She was actually sitting in the black section when the white section filled and the bus driver asked her and 3 others to get up and give up their seats to move. The other 3 reluctantly did, and she said, "No, I will not move." She later said that when the driver ordered her to move, she thought of Emmett Till, and she said, "I just couldn't go back." Even today, many of us, or many times, Rosa Parks is pictured as this older woman who was tired from work. That's the way the story was told to me. Well, she was in her early 40s. She was like 42. And she said, "People always say that didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. I was not tired physically, or no more tired than I usually was at the end of a working day. And I was not old. I was only 42. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in. Rallying around Park's case, the Montgomery bus boycott began the next day. And after more than a year, it was successful. The United States Supreme Court ruled that segregated transportation was unconstitutional. But Parks endured significant hardships along the way. She was unjustly fired from her department store job. She received almost continual death threats, so much so that she left Montgomery and moved to Detroit. There she served as secretary to Representative John Conyers. She befriended Malcolm X and became active in the Black Power movement. In 1995, she published her memoir, Quiet Strength, focusing on her Christian faith. She insisted that her abilities to love her enemies and stand up for her convictions were gifts from God. She said, God has always given me the strength to say what is right. Rosa died in 2005 at the age of 92, becoming the first woman, the second African American, and the second private citizen to lie in honor in the Capitol Rotunda in Washington, D.C. Thanks be to God for this salty saint who was tough, tenacious, and a spirited crusader for racial equality. Finally, this morning, February 18th, anybody have that birthday? Toni Morrison's birthday. She was born Chloe Wofford in Lorain, Ohio in 1931. After a stint teaching at Howard University, she worked as an editor for Random House, raising her two sons as a single parent. And it was after she put her sons to bed and before they got up in the morning that she began to work on a novel about a black girl, Pecola Breedlove, who desperately wanted blue eyes. After many rejections, The Bluest Eye was finally accepted for publication in 1970. Morrison was 39 years old. We know she published many other novels, exploring the Black experience from slavery to Reconstruction, to the Great Depression, to the Korean War. Always, she challenged us with her unflinching exposition of racism, violence, and sexism. While working as an editor, she helped compile the Black Book, not the Green Book, the Black Book, an anthology of archival materials documenting African American experience. And among those materials was a short article about Margaret Garner, a young mother who escaped enslavement in 1856. And when the enslavers caught up with her, she killed her 2-year-old daughter to spare her from slavery. Morrison decided to write a novel inspired by Garner's story because there were no memorials to the millions of victims of enslavement. How many of you have read Beloved? I remember reading it and struggling through it. And finally, at the end, realizing that she had me feeling crazy, that I had lost my mind, which was the point, that this woman had to have lost her mind to make such a sacrifice. Beloved won the Pulitzer Prize in 1988, And Morrison received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1993. Three tough and salty women. Sojourner Truth, who sued a white slave owner in court and won, who followed a holy calling to speak and travel for racial and gender justice. Rosa Parks, who labored tirelessly in the background for civil rights until she grew too tired of injustice to remain silent. And Toni Morrison, whose sharp intellect and evocative language brought painful stories of racism to light. All women of deep faith and thankfully long lives. All women of profound courage with a heart for justice, and salty for sure. Finally, I invite you to listen to an excerpt from Toni Morrison's Paradise. It reads like a poem. Love is divine only and difficult always. If you think it is easy, you are a fool. If you think it is natural, you are blind. It is a learned application without reason or motive except that it is God. You do not deserve love regardless of the suffering you have endured. You do not deserve love because somebody did you wrong. You do not deserve love just because you want it. You can only earn by practice and careful contemplations the right to express it. Which is to say, you have to earn God. You have to practice God. You have to think God carefully. And if you are a good and diligent student, you may secure the right to show love. Love is not a gift. It is a diploma. I believe Sojourner Truth, Rosa Parks, and Toni Morrison received their diplomas. Indeed, their doctorates in love, as they labored for justice throughout their flavorful and feisty lives. May our lives be salty too. Amen.
Thank you, Anne. Before we move on to the offertory, Anne has agreed, and I didn't put it in order of service, to take any questions or comments. And we seem to have the time to do so, so we can open the floor now if anyone has anything to say.
I was thinking about here at Tubman, the idea, you're in Cambridge, and what are you going to do? You're going to walk to Philadelphia. You have to find a route, but you have to know who to ask which way to go. So it's just the sheer toil that you have to go through, the labor to get there. It's not just, yes, you have to be willing to do it, and you have to be willing to take a chance, but just the idea that you're going to walk to Philadelphia and can't even have to be careful who you ask the directions from. It's just a daunting task. Yeah.
And then to repeat it a dozen more times.
Thank you. It's not a question, it was, I didn't realize how ignorant I was. I mean, slavery I knew about, but individuals. I had no idea what they were doing or what they went through. Rosa Parks, yes, I remember the bus thing. And I've heard of Tubman, but knew nothing about her. The other woman, clueless. So I just want to appreciate you for, giving me some knowledge and some insight on how it was back then and what we can do today as individuals, white, black, whatever, to try to get that salt that you're talking about, find it in us. And whoever your higher power is, talk to him, try to figure out what he would tell you to do. And like I said, I really appreciate hearing this story today. Very knowledgeable now about it, and I won't forget it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Black History Month has become a very emotional and important part of my life, and it's a reminder of the stories I don't know. And I was in junior high when desegregation occurred, growing up in Louisiana. And so many books, particularly The Warmth of Other Suns, which uses a story of a gentleman who left Monroe, Louisiana, where I grew up. I'm learning my prehistory, and I'm trying to understand. I was clueless of what the African Americans around me were going through. And the spirit or coincidence, God incidents, brought a gentleman to my yoga class a month or so ago with a Northeast Louisiana t-shirt, sweatshirt on. And it turns out, I said, "Did you go there?" And he said, "Yeah, I graduated there." And he said, I graduated from Neville High School too. He graduated from my high school, which was the white high school. He was in the first class of desegregation when they shut down or changed the black high school. So, yeah, I think it's important. I'm finding it important to learn more about the life that I was ignorant of growing up.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anne, for coming today. That was wonderful that we pay attention to this richness in our history that we may not know about. I love that idea of saltiness. I guess there's a lot of different names for that. It might even be grace as it comes to us, and whether we're going to be in history. And I'm thinking of those three women and all the other people, all the other salty men and women that were around them that did little things every day that showed that spirit and that mission, and that we each have it, and we have that opportunity to use it too.
Some may have been able to speak loudly enough that this wouldn't be necessary, but just curious, the reference again that you were using at the end about love and a degree in love, because for me, I guess I always felt like love is something that's available to all of us, not a degree. It's something that we all have that we can offer and should offer perhaps a little more freely than we do.
That was Toni Morrison, just to remind you. And love is not a gift. She ends with, "It is not a gift, it is a diploma." I think part of her message is that love is work. you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You shall love your God. Love it's not easy.
Thank you, and I might just make one footnote. We've been talking as if this is all history, but I encourage you to look what's happening in Florida, in Texas, and other areas of the country, and maybe it's not so over yet. It's just a different form. And now we can pass the baskets for the offertory, and I think Michael has some music for us. Thank you, Michael, and for all those gifts, we give thanks. Now we're going to sing a hymn that I think is more familiar to all of us. Number 169 in the Gray Hymnal. Someday was much better. And you have a closing word for us.
Just a little postscript on Rosa Parks. Guess I thought of this when Jan reminded us that it still goes on, the fight continues. In 1994, not that long ago, the Ku Klux Klan applied to sponsor a section of Interstate 55 near St. Louis, Missouri, which would mean the Klan's name would appear on roadside signs announcing sponsorship, sponsored by the, Since by law the state could not reject the application, the Missouri legislature came up with a novel idea, inspired. They voted to name that section of the road Rosa Parks Highway. Asked for her thoughts on this honor, she is said to have replied with a gleam of mischief in her eyes, "It's always nice to be thought of." May we remember all those who've inspired us to do justice, to love others, to live in peace. Let us go forth. Amen.
Thank you. The words in your order of service for extinguishing the chalice, followed by the psalm benediction. And if you will start now, we extinguish the flame, the light of truth, the warmth of community, the fire of commitment, the peace we carry in our hearts until we meet again.
With a Rosa Parks Highway.